Hi everybody, welcome to the Top 2 Inches of Sport podcast with me, Anthony Sheriff. This is a podcast about something that's always fascinated me, the mindset required to succeed in elite level sport. On this podcast, I'm going to talk to people who I really look up to in the world of sport and try to find out how they deal with the highs and lows that come with consistently striving for success in the unforgiving environment of elite sport. This week, I spoke to England international rugby player Billy Vunipola. Billy is currently one of the biggest names in the sport and has achieved huge success for his club Saracens as well as internationally for England. In this episode, Billy talks about the sports psychology set up in the Saracens and England camps and discusses how he prepares for big matches. He also talks about his faith and how this has helped him to deal with setbacks in his career, as well as also helping him to deal with the struggles that came with success. Billy is also in a unique position of playing at the highest level alongside his brother Mako, who also plays for Saracens and England, and this is something that Billy talks about throughout this episode. It was brilliant talking to Billy this week, and hopefully you enjoyed as well. So here's this week's episode of the Top 2 Inches of Sport with Billy Vunipola. Right, Billy, thanks very much for coming onto the podcast today. As we go on, we'll talk about, sports psychology and just the mental side of rugby in general. But before we start, if you can just give us a little bit of a background on yourself, because I know you come from a big, strong rugby family. I think your dad played for Tonga, maybe even your uncles as well. And you ended up sort of travelling to different countries. I think you lived in Tonga, Wales, England. So even just geographically, can you give us a bit of a breakdown of your childhood?
Well, yeah, you mentioned there, grew up in kind of a rugby mad family. My granddad on my dad's side played for Tonga and coached Tonga, and then coached our local village team. And then that's where it kind of started. So then my dad and his, I want to say 4 other brothers, maybe 5, they all played for Tonga, and they all kind of ended up in different parts of the world. So 2 ended up in America. 1 was in New Zealand, but now is back home. And then the youngest of my uncles is now based in Australia. And like you said there, I'm not even sure if that adds up to 5, but anyway, my dad came to the 99 World Cup, captain Tonga, where they famously or infamously lost to England by more than 100 points. But I remember being at Twickenham. Anyway, he got a contract at Vunipola, which is, like you said, in Wales. And luckily for us, we were surrounded by great people in Wales, which meant that eventually we could kind of reside in England permanently. In the UK. Yeah. And then the other side of my family kind of kicked in. My mum is a minister. I'm not sure if you know, but she got a job in, she started off in Bristol. So it was kind of on the border. My dad was still working in Wales at this time. He was retired. And then when we were in Bristol, we were there for 5 years. And after our 5 years in Bristol, I'd finished school. Then I finished secondary school. And then my mum moved to High Wycombe, which is obviously closer to London. Yeah. Which is why then I ended up at Harrow school and linking up with Wasps.
Yeah.
And then after, my brother was at Bristol when we were in Bristol, and he stayed whilst we left. And then he then signed for Saracens after his 2 years at Bristol. And then we wanted to play together, but I wanted him to come to Wasps, and he did come to Wasps to have a look around. I guess they didn't really take to him as much as what Saracens did.
Yeah.
And that kind of made our decision for both of us. I know it sounds silly to some people, but family is a massive part of my life. So once they made that decision, it was kind of taken out of my hands. And as much as I wanted to fight it, I ended up here at Saracens. And to be fair, I can't say I've ever looked back and regretted it.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed my time, and long may it continue.
Yeah.
But that's a brief rundown.
Yeah. Obviously, it's a rugby mad family. Some of the things you've just spoken about there, all of your family are so engrossed in rugby. So obviously, I'm assuming when you were growing up, was that all you wanted to do as well? Like, were you really driven to make it as a rugby player as well?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's well known that my parents didn't want us to play rugby because it was a tough gig.
Yeah.
Especially with my dad coming over. The security that it provides is not kind of where you want your kids, the road you want your kids to go down, because it is very uncertain. But like you said, we fell in love with it from the get-go, and I think being surrounded by it our whole lives, growing up in Tonga, going to our village teams, and just like living and breathing it, I think it was inevitable. But
Yeah.
I don't think we understood how much hard work it took, and I guess we found that out in our later years.
Yeah. What would your dad have been like when you were growing up then in relation to your rugby career? Like would he, because he's played at such a high level, he can obviously see the ability you've got. Would he have been almost critical of you, or did he just stay away from the rugby side of things and didn't really talk to you much about it?
Oh no, he was fully engrossed in it. I think the best thing that did happen to us was our parents. They kind of were a good team, and although they fight sometimes over how strict my dad was, I think we're the ones who are enjoying the fruits of our labour at the moment. And like you said there, he was pretty tough on us in terms of being critical of how he thought we played or how thought we could play. So I remember, like we joke about it now, but I remember he'd always leave for work, but he'd come into our rooms and say, right, once school's over, you got to come back and do this running session. And you go into school and you don't really focus on school. You kind of want school to go like never end because you're like, oh my gosh, I have to do fitness after school. And I remember I sit in classes and just think how envious I was of other kids who could just like go home, watch TV, do their homework. It was pretty strict growing up, but like we think back now and we joke about it and laugh about it. And
Yeah.
we're very lucky to have had our parents or to have our parents.
No, definitely, yeah. Does that stay the same when you play at the top level? Would you still speak to your dad after a game, and would he still tell you if you weren't on your game?
Yeah, 100%. He's never gonna. He watches like when we go to the house before they got the. I think it's 1 terabyte of memory on your Sky. You know when you can record movies and
Yeah.
stuff. He's got all of our games recorded, and then he's like, right, I need the new Sky or the Sky Q because I can't record anymore. So when you go over there, you just watch reruns of your game, and you're like, if it's one of those games you didn't really enjoy or didn't play well, and you're like, Dad, do we really need to watch this? But they love it. My mum loves it too, and so does our whole family. So it does kind of dominate our life, but it's
Yeah.
only a short time before I guess I step away from the game. So I'm just trying to enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned there a few minutes ago your mum worked in High Wycombe. That's sort of how you ended up in Harrow. So anyone listening doesn't know Harrow, one of the most prestigious schools in the world, really. Like yourself and Winston Churchill and all the boys went there. Did what was that experience like? Because I'm assuming like you went to more like regular schools before that. So what was the experience of Harrow like?
Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was class. Like being there was obviously like a different world. So you go to the bottom of Harrow on the hill, so the school's on a hill, and you're just in like it's just normal, it's a normal world, you see normal people, but once you get on the hill, everyone is and not like not it's not a bad thing, but everyone's just, got a lot of money. So like they live in a different world. So
Yeah.
when I went there, I had this like image in my head of what these lads would be like, but they were far from it, like very down to earth, like always invited me to do things, always wanted me to be around and always wanted to be around me. And some of my closest friends are from there, came to my wedding, and just shows you how I guess like we grow up with this idea because of what we don't have, especially myself, and you just think how the other side live and they must be different people. But it was a class experience, and we spent a lot of time hiding and not going to lessons, which was funny because I'm like I didn't have to pay, which I was very lucky and fortunate for. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but these guys are paying whatever this amount of money is, and they're hiding with me. I'm like, oh, fair play to you, lads.
Big money, huh?
Yeah.
So look, when you're in Harrow, you end up going to the Wasps Academy. Now, like this isn't that long ago. Obviously, it's only a few years ago. But I'd be interested to know what was the sports psychology situation in Wasps then, even just with the academy, because I'm assuming at that stage you probably didn't have a sports psychologist that worked exclusively with the academy, but would you have had anybody coming in just giving workshops or doing talks with the young fellas in the academy at the time?
I think it wasn't as prominent as it is now. I
Yeah.
think there would have been occasions where they would come in, but that was kind of towards the end of the time of people like Phil Vickery, all these old school guys who were just like, right, just get on with it. Whatever you're told to do, just do it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, they might be into it, they might not be, but when I went in there was a few workshops, I guess, put on by the RPA in terms of sports psychology, and I think more support was put towards the financial side of what you can do with, I guess, on an academy contract, what little money you've got. But
yeah,
from what I experienced, I don't think there was too much. No.
Yeah. What about then when you turn pro? Be it with Wasps or even Saracens? How does, in a Premiership rugby club, how does like the sports psychology situation look? Do you have people that work with you in there the whole time? Do you have just people that dip in and out occasionally? What way does it work?
Oh, it's massive at Saracens. We have a specific role for it. His name is David Jones, who is class.
Yeah.
He is his title is PDP, which is a player development program, but he covers everything. So he can help you whether you want to go to uni, or whether you just want to talk, or whether you're going to an interview and what you should say and how you should present yourself, and all these life skills, which is probably why it's called a development program. You kind of go through him and he'll point you in the right direction.
Yeah.
But fortunately for me, I've kind of never really dealt with him in terms of anything off the pitch or on it, to be fair.
Yeah.
I use my parents as a sounding board a lot.
Yeah.
I know not everyone's that lucky, but at Sarries and at England now, actually, I lie. At England, we had, obviously, I think it was already said in the media that we had, a few run-ins in the summer before the World Cup. And that was all geared towards people opening up through a sports psychologist to try and get things off our chest so that we weren't like walking around on eggshells around each other. And I thought that was amazing because it made us closer as a team.
Yeah.
And now she is still with us, and I've started talking to her a little bit more about things on the pitch and off it as well. So I think this is probably my first time, and I've been playing now for about 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned that was pre World Cup. You're talking about the psychology meeting. Yeah. So this is in between like the 2015 and the 2019 World Cup. Obviously the 2015 World Cup, you went out in the group stage, so it was a bit of a disaster. And I think there was 16 members of the squad still on the squad for the 2019 World Cup. So like without going into the details of what was said, like these kind of group psychology sessions that you had, did it just kind of improve the team dynamic? Did it make you feel better as an individual? Like what was the main takeaways from these sessions?
I think the biggest thing from my point of view was that it kind of showed everyone where their heads were at in terms of like things so like minimal or what people might not think is a massive deal. Like, what does that guy think of me? Or what does that player in that team think of me? And what do I think of him? Because there might be like a rivalry that's kind of stopping a mutual respect that is there. And, sometimes it's hard. Like, for example, like I love my brother and I respect my brother, but I'd never kind of just be like, oh, man, I love you so much. Because he'd turn around and be like, man, you're right. And so sometimes I kind of have to speak through my wife and show through my actions rather than, and that's a small example of it. And then you kind of build up a level of respect for each other that never was truly there, but also a space to be honest. I don't like using the word space, but you give people an opportunity to say, this is what I think happened in the 2015 World Cup that was reported on by the newspapers. Is it true? That's things like that. And then because there's so much going on in 2015 and whatever was reported on, but we had an opportunity to be honest with each other. And I think that was the best thing about it, was that we kind of knew where we stood with everyone.
Yeah.
Not kind of, we knew where we stood with everyone. And from that platform or stage, we then can move forward as a group together.
No, fair play to Eddie Jones for doing it, because I think, a group of rugby players, they're probably like the stereotypical rugby player you think of. They're probably, big, strong, tough men. They're not the type of people you would imagine getting locked in a room talking about their feelings. So maybe initially it might have been difficult for you, but it sounds like it obviously worked. Initially, was there any sort of tension if people were bringing up issues? Was there any bit of anger going on, or did everyone buy into it pretty quick?
There's definitely tension. But I think if there isn't tension, then people aren't being honest.
Yeah.
And that's something that we're used to it now at the club here at Sarries, where we can have that tension and uncomfortable conversations without there being like an underlying issue of like, I just don't like you. You know, if it's that, then we can't sort of fix that. But if it's a genuine thought or a genuine want of a solution, then it's fine. You know, we can sort that out. But if it's just like, I don't like that you play for that team, you know, so I don't like you.
Yeah.
But you got to get past all that. And that's something that we did really, really well before the World Cup.
Yeah. So that's more in terms of the group dynamic. I just want to ask you about yourself now with your own individual performance. On game day, how would you be before a game? Like, would you be a nervous, anxious type of a fella, or like would you be very chilled out before a game? Like, do you have your own routines that you go through to kind of control your emotions?
I think when I started off, I was very nervous because I was desperate not to be a one-hit wonder, and I was desperate not to be pigeonholed to be this guy who was just powerful. I wanted to, you know, because when I first started playing any rugby, I'd always play like 60 minutes, and there was always this kind of tag that was on my back. That was like, oh, you can only last 60 minutes, and that's kind of what my dad was always pushing us hard to get rid of when we were younger, because he kind of could see that would happen. And so I was really nervous when I first started playing for England that I couldn't be better than just a 60-minute guy.
Yeah.
And that made me nervous because I wanted to be in games, but I also didn't want to run around saving myself to play 80 minutes, you know?
Yeah.
And once I got past that, and once I got really confident, I have this tendency to get too confident. I think is well documented, but when I get too confident, it's almost when I'm confident is obviously when I play my best, and when I'm too confident is when I get all my injuries. It's not a coincidence, or you know, it's not something that I've done badly. It's just I do things that are reckless that maybe I wouldn't do when I'm not too confident. But at the moment, before games, I've got to a stage now where I'm just relaxed and I make peace with whatever happens, and I just go out there and just try and end myself and put myself in a hole. And I know that if I put myself in a hole, then I know I'm putting my best foot forward. And if that's all I can do, that's all I can do.
Yeah. So you're saying their experience is an awful big part of it. Is that the same then in massive cup finals? You know, you will have played in massive games, you know, European Cup finals, Premiership finals, a World Cup final. You've probably played in the biggest possible games you could play in. So do you still go through the same process even before those big monstrous games? And initially, if you think back to your first finals, like your first European final, your first Premiership final, did any of those occasions get to you at any stage, or were you okay with those?
No, they definitely got to me. I can't lie, but again, what you said, the experience of playing in those games is paramount for me personally. You know, some people like your Dalalios, they played in one final, won them. But for me personally, as a player, when I first started playing, it came back to that: was I confident in what I could do? And it was still that tag that I was talking about before of like, I didn't have confidence in myself that I could last in 80 minutes playing at the level that I can in the first half. And that was all physical, but that physical kind of took away from my mental, you know. So because I felt like that, I didn't feel as confident going into these finals. And then when we lost, so I was nervous because of that. And then when we would lose, we lost two finals in 2014. I was like, right, I need to change something, and it's not mental, it's physical. And we won the following year against Bath. And again, the experience of finals the year before put us in a good spot, because we were like, we've been here before, we know what it takes. And that gave me confidence, and even more confidence that I knew that I played another year of rugby under my belt at this level. And then I felt confident. And then the World Cup was another building block for me again, because we got there, didn't have a great World Cup. And then I was like, right, I need to change something. So then we started that season in the Prem year, and I felt unbelievably confident. Won the double, went to Australia and did whatever we did in Australia. And then that's when probably I kind of fell off the cliff of too confident, which coincided with all my injuries. And then that was probably the toughest time, was like kind of rebuilding my mental resilience.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, a lot of people talk to sports psychologists, and that's why I lean on my faith so much, because it gives me so much strength. It's almost like Jesus is my sports psychologist and everyone else has a doctor. I talk to him every day and every night, and it's something that almost makes me feel bulletproof, because any outcome is a good outcome.
Yeah. No, your faith is interesting, because I know not many top athletes are as open about it as you are. I will get onto that later on. I have a couple of questions I want to ask you about that. Well, you mentioned there you mentioned a couple of times now about sometimes feeling overconfident. That's something that a lot of people probably don't think about that often. People like yourself, you kind of burst onto the scene, so it can become a big possibility that you could almost feel invincible. So rather than like eradicating that completely, is it almost a balancing act you need to get? Because that's, in some ways, that's a good way to feel, isn't it? To become one of the best players in the world, you almost need to have that. But then, so rather than getting rid of that feeling, do you just need to learn to balance it, to switch it off at the end of the 80 minutes almost?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's how I would put it. It is a balance. You want to go into these games feeling confident, but I think my confidence kind of spilled over onto off the pitch, and things like getting dropped in 2014. I just remembered now, like, was an outcome of that. Yeah. Was that I thought, oh, I'll be fine, they'll always pick me. But at the time, it felt rubbish. I won't lie. But now I look back, and I think it was one of the best things that Stuart Lancaster could do to me. A lesson in kind of being grounded, because, like you said, I kind of burst onto the scene without much rugby.
Yeah.
The Lions tour happened, and I got an opportunity to go to Argentina. It kind of worked in my favour. Then I had a semi-good Six Nations in the 2014 year, and then the autumn came, and I kind of was just like, I thought I'd cracked it, and then it all came crashing down. And like I said, it was a building block, and then I learned from there. The World Cup was another one in 2015. 2016 was probably one of my biggest hiccups in terms of injuries and trying to get back to fitness and missing the Lions tour. All these things that have happened to me is, like I said, is always been a good outcome. And although it's been painful, I am where I am because of the experiences that I've had.
Absolutely. If you are feeling overconfident at times, is that where, I know you're saying like you can be drawn back in by your faith, but also is your family very important there? Your wife, your dad, again, having gone through professional rugby, did they ever see you going down a bad road and rein you back in again?
Yeah, like I said before, they're my sounding board, but they're also the ones who are always looking out for my best interests. So throughout the whole time, they kind of try to hold my hand, but also there's only a certain point that they can take me. So it came to a point where I had to, step up and take ownership of my actions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's one interview I heard with you before. You might not even remember it, but there was something you said in it that was really interesting. You were asked about one of the favorite games you've ever played in, and you kind of picked one out that was against Munster for Saracens in the Aviva in Dublin, and you said you loved it because it just felt like everyone was against you. So do you love like a hostile atmosphere? Because I've never played sport anywhere even near the level you played at, but I always would have imagined it'd be great playing in a stadium that's cheering for you. But do you love when everyone is out to get you almost? Does that just kind of gee you on even more?
I don't know. It's it kind of like had this real. It just kind of touches on the perfect like motivations in my heart, I guess, in terms of I was never meant to make it this far, like a little kid from a village in Tonga.
Yeah.
With, essentially a poor family. We're never meant to get here. And that's why we kind of held on to our faith so much, was because, why am I so lucky? And I think that day was just like, I just love reading everything about it. Like Saracens have bought like 1,000 fans. And we talked about this as a team, like, it's going to be a sea of red. And we were just like, it doesn't matter if there's like 1,500 fans outside or, 50,000 cheering for us. It doesn't matter. The people that matter were the boys on the pitch, and everything was like kind of geared towards us winning. I just remember like the yellow card for us. I was just like, well, we'll be right. And then we kind of ended that half 6-6, and I was like, we're on it, boys. And then when we went into the change room, I just looked around and no one said anything. We were just all smiling. Like, we just enjoyed the fact that no one gave us a chance and no one thought that there was like any way we could beat not just Munster, but the whole of the stadium. And that's kind of where that comment came from. But honestly, it's one of the best atmospheres I've ever experienced. It was like, sometimes you didn't have time to think, and then sometimes you could stand there waiting for a scrum, and it was just like, this is why I do all the hard stuff. And it's like you said, you've never experienced it, but it's something that I've never, ever, ever be able to replicate ever again because of everything that happened and fell into place for that game to happen.
Yeah. So like, obviously your team, they feel kind of galvanized by the negative energy from the crowd. You on an individual basis, do you get driven by doubt? Like, you were saying earlier about how people thought, oh, he blows up after an hour, he only has 60 minutes in him, and that might have played with your confidence back then. But does doubt drive you now? And would you also, like, would you read articles about yourself? Would you listen to pundits, read Twitter comments, things like that?
I think if it was a toss up between someone bigging me up and doubting me, I'd rather someone doubt me because then I've got something to prove and something to work with. I can go out there and just stay, I guess, out of the limelight and just do my thing. But some people the other way around, and I think the doubt that I had before in terms of my performance, which made me nervous, is something that I've worked really hard to eradicate. So now when people doubt me, I'm like, well, I've done all the work. I just need to show people that I've got it in me. And then that's just down to me, and I don't really talk to any sports psychologists about it, but I think the other side of that would be, it's all well and good having that mindset, but the other side to that mindset is that what if there isn't anything on the line? And that's where sometimes I get lost at it, because I'm like, you get into a game, and you're like, you don't play as well as you can or want to, because there isn't that so much on the line. And sometimes I've heard people call me, he's a big game player. It's nice to be called that, but I'd also like to be a very consistent player. Because at the same time, it's important to be consistent, because you don't become a big game player by not winning all the other games to get to the big games.
Definitely, yeah.
And that's something that I'm trying to work on, but there's always something to work on, and that's one of them.
Yeah, 100%, yeah. Just changing gear a little bit now. How do you personally deal with setbacks? Because you've had a couple of bad ones, to be fair. I know you broke your arm, I think, 3 times in space. You were out for almost 18 months at one stage. The famous one for yourself, the last Lions tour, you got selected, but you ended up being sent home because of it was a shoulder injury, wasn't it? So times like that, and also let's just profile losses, like you lost a World Cup final, you can't lose a bigger game than a World Cup final. So times like that, big injuries, big defeats, is it like, would you get quite down in yourself, or have you got, again, going back to your faith, maybe, I know a lot of religious people maybe think that God has a bigger plan, so these are just small, almost insignificant bumps in the road. So have you got a good perspective about these things?
Yeah, I do. I think I'm a very optimistic person.
Yeah.
And I think when I had all my injuries, it was kind of, when I first had my injuries, I was like, I'll be back, because I was back last time. And leaning on my own powers, I guess. And I wasn't so strong into my faith. And I started doing things that wasn't myself, because I was like, again, that overconfidence. I was like, well, I've done it before, I'll be back. And then broke my arm the second time. I was like, okay, I'll be back. Then I did my knee. And then I was like, okay, I'll be back. And then I did my arm 2 more times. And I was like, okay, I'm not getting it. What do I need to learn here? And then it came to a point where I just sat down and was like, okay, I'm going to read a Bible verse and see what it says. And the first one I read on my phone, by the way, which my mum doesn't think counts. So sorry, mum. I threw open the Bible app on my phone, and the first verse on there, I'll paraphrase it, was basically saying that the trials that you go through is basically to make your faith stronger and not to make you weaker, but everything that you go through, you have the strength to get through it. You'll be provided with the strength to get through it. And when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, what are the chances of this happening? So I just kind of like started reading it, and it just gave me like, almost like put me at ease in terms of the position that I was in. But also, I learned a lot of gratitude from reading it, because I think my identity was all into rugby, and I forget about my family, forget about all the good things that I've got, like how lucky I was to have a house or a car, a nice car. And I always wanted nice cars. And when I did get a nice car, I was like, okay, what's the next thing? I never really appreciate it. And now I've got to a stage where like, okay, I don't need a nice car because that didn't make me happy. I don't need the newest phone all the time because there's a new phone in a year's time. So that didn't make me happy. And I was like, okay, what makes me happy? And then that's what drove me so much into my faith and made me realize that like there is so much more to life. Like even looking out, and like today it's snowing, and you're just like, wow, all right, let's go out with my family and walk around in the snow.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah. Were you always religious, or is it these moments that kind of drew you back down that path?
Always went to church and always sat there and didn't listen like everyone else in Tonga, because your parents made you go. But I think that was kind of my moment that I was pushed into, or I had to go through to be where I'm at today in terms of my faith. And I know it's caused a lot of uproar in the last few years, but the journey that I went on, like no one could ever not walk in my shoes and say, oh, this guy's a certain person, because the journey that I went on was already written for me, and the outcome was this. I reckon if I carried on living the way I did, I probably still wouldn't be here, because like I said, I kept doing the things that I shouldn't have been doing, like drinking all the time, which I never drank before, getting injured all the time, and doing things that were selfish and self-conceited. So this was the biggest lesson I learned from rugby.
Yeah. Is there ever a stage when, maybe you kind of answered this in that answer anyway, but is there ever a stage where like your career and your faith are almost at odds with each other? And what I mean by that is there's, rugby is a very laddish culture, isn't it? Like you spoke there about drinking and things like that. So is there ever times now, even when you're getting involved in things, that it almost doesn't match up to your faith? It doesn't feel right because of how strong your beliefs are. If that makes sense.
Yeah, massively. I think the hardest thing about being a Christian is like everyone expects you to be perfect, and everyone expects you to do things that no one else does. And I fight that in my head as well, because I'm like, okay, I need to be better at this. I need to not do that. I need to control my tongue and not swear. And it just comes to a point where like I realize now that no one is perfect. I'm not perfect. So there's no point trying to be perfect. But at the same time, we're put on earth to enjoy ourselves, but also to follow God's law. And I try and do that as much as I can. But if you speak to my wife, I still annoy her. I still do things that I end up, being in trouble for. And so that'll never change. But I try to be perfect. And honestly, it's the most stressful thing in the world. You end up just not enjoying life. And you're supposed to enjoy life, but obviously according to God's law. And it's just important for me at the stage that I'm at now that I try my best to follow that.
Yeah. But for anyone listening that isn't aware, obviously your brother Mako plays with Saracens, plays with England with you as well. Would he share your faith?
Oh yeah, 100%. He does. He's just not as outspoken as me, and also, like I said, we've had different experiences with it. like the injuries that I've had. He's had injuries as well, but I think the journey that I went on with my injuries and where I kind of found myself probably pushed me quicker into it than what he's kind of going on now with his journey with
Yeah.
faith.
Yeah. How close would yourself and Mako be? Because I know you play very well together on the pitch, but would you be very close off it?
We are very close, but it's just one of those relationships where we know inherently that we care for each other. And if we ever needed anything, we talk to each other. But day-to-day stuff, I think he gets annoyed that I'm so loud and brash and always like wanting to be centered for attention. And he gets annoyed by that and frustrated by that because he is funny, like he's very dry. But I'd say I'm probably just a bit funny and I just get in the road. So he probably doesn't like the fact that I'm there. And also I'm his little brother, so, you know.
I'm not sure what the time frame is here, but I did read that there was a couple of years, was it, in your childhood where you actually didn't grow up together? Because I think, did your dad, maybe was he playing in Auckland, and did Mako go with your parents and you didn't? So what was the story with that?
Yeah, when we were kids, mum and dad couldn't afford to take both of us to uni. I was actually in Wellington.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
And my parents took Mako with them because he was the oldest. And I stayed with my grandparents, which is probably why, again, I think I'm closer to my faith because, you know, in Tonga, everything is centered around the church.
Yeah.
And, you know, people here go to church on Sunday, but in Tonga, it's like there's an event there on every day. And when I say event, it's just like a meet up, talk to people and youth groups. So that's probably another reason. But I spent the first 6-7 years with my grandparents. I was very spoiled, which is probably why I'm so much different to my brother. And I'd say my dad was pretty strict on my brother when he was smaller. So that's probably why he's the way he is.
Yeah.
And we didn't get on for a long time.
Really? Yeah.
Because you know, when he came over to Tonga, like I kind of ran the house with my grandparents. So like whatever I said happened. But I didn't know this. I was only 4 or 5, but my mum and dad joke about it now because my little nephew's like that. You know, our first nephew in our family, our first grandson in our family is similar to what I was like as a little boy. Not as spoiled, but and that's why we're so different. That's why we have such different personalities. And sometimes I don't think about what I'm going to do before I do it. I just kind of run on emotion, where he's more, you know, he takes his time to think about things and then make his decisions.
Yeah. No, it's so strange to see two brothers playing at such a high level. I mean, you're basically Rugby, Gary and Phil Neville, aren't you? I can't think of any other examples really. But like playing at that level,
I'll take Gary.
Yeah, obviously playing at that level, you know, you're going to be so focused, you're going to be so professional. Well, he's still your brother. So, for example, like if just say you're playing the same game and like Mako had a bad game, he was taken off, or Mako goes off injured or something like that. Can something like that play on your mind, even just 1 or 2%?
I think for the time that he's injured, yes. But you know, I know he's tough. So like, I'll worry about him if I'll go over and ask him. I always do. I ask him if he's okay. And if he gives me the yes or no, then I just kind of have to move on because that's the way life is and sport is. And he'd do the same with me. You know, there's a genuine care there. But once we're onto the pit, once whatever's happen, you kind of have to move on because 14 other lads are relying on you to do your job.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. What will you do when you finish up playing? And I know you've got years and years left playing, but you did mention earlier on about how you've kind of got this rugby identity. It's probably, you know, it's all you've ever really done. Your whole family is just wrapped up in rugby. Do you have a plan post rugby, or are you going to looking to stay involved in it?
At the moment, my plan is I'd like to go back to Tonga.
Yeah.
And live for a few years, and obviously just had a little one, and I want him to grow up knowing that life isn't easy. You know, because his mum spoils him already, and he's only 2 months. He's not allowed to cry for longer than 0.1 seconds. So that would be like one of my plans is or my plan, God willing, is I go back to Tonga for a few years with my family, and I like to not set up an academy, but almost give people an opportunity in my village to see what it takes to be a professional rugby player.
Yeah.
You know, the discipline, and also how hard it is to be consistent with that discipline. Because like, I know for a fact that when I first started, I was like, okay, I'm going to be on a diet. I'll be on a diet for like 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, I'm like, I go all the way the other way. But you know, there's a balance to it. Yeah, exactly. But there's a balance to it where if you want to be at the top, you have to be consistently like good at everything. You can't be terrible at one thing, but then amazing at one thing. And also, like, obviously, we breed quite big characters back home, and in terms of size. So, like, just getting them to a position where if they were ever called to go abroad and have a contract abroad, they hit the ground running. And that's something that I've thought about for a long time. With my wife, and you know, I've got good connections here with people that I went to school with at Harrow, and you know, I don't know. I'm sure we can have a word with Eddie, maybe, who can help. But you know, that's my goal. Is I want to go back to Tonga and just help as much as I can.
Your son will surely be the next big rugby player, will he?
At the moment, my wife wants him to go to school and go to uni, the traditional pathway. But you know, I think he looks pretty big, and all the nurses say he's big. So I'm hoping he'll be like a defensive lineman or an O lineman in the NFL. For the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been staying up late with him watching NFL. I just want him to get his eye in for his 2.
What is he, 2 months old? Yeah.
Yeah, he's 2 months.
Another 12 years or so he'll be playing it. Yeah, no, look, that's good stuff, Billy. There's 2 questions that I finish up asking everyone, so I'll be interested to see what you say to these. First one is, what athlete in the history of sport, and it can be from any sport you want, would you admire most from a mentality point of view, and why?
I don't know. I think the popular answer would probably be your Michael Jordans of the world.
He's got a few, all right. Yeah, I've heard that a few times, yeah, because of the documentary.
Well, yeah, I think it's just because of recent memory. But one thing I would say is, you know, Bo Jackson.
Yeah.
Who played 2 professional sports. I mean, like, to do 1 is like class. But to do 2 and then everyone be saying that he was the best running back they've ever seen, and he's the best, like, you know, some of the stuff he's doing in baseball with his like throwing and batting. Like, I know a lot of people now, like with Pat Mahomes, they say, oh, he could have played baseball, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, whereas this guy, like, he could have played baseball, and he did. And I think that mindset to do that is like, I don't know. You have to be like crazy relaxed, but also at the same time crazy competitive and be like skillful. So I'd say Bo Jackson.
100%. You into your American sports, but it sounds the same, do you?
Yeah, I just love watching anything. Not AFL. Anything other than AFL.
Yeah. Right. Good stuff. The last question that I ask everyone is, if you were to go back to the start of your career, let's just say when you're turning professional with Wasps, and give that younger version of yourself one piece of advice, again from, you know, mindset, mentality point of view, what would you say?
I would say, I'd say you're focusing on the wrong things, because, you know, as every 21-year-old or 20-year-old, when you move out, you just want to get a girlfriend. I'd say you're focusing on the wrong things, and get your act together. Like, you know, you could be good. You could be good, but sooner. And I took too long, I think, on some occasions, to like, for the penny to drop.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Good place to end as well. Thanks a million, Billy, for coming on to the podcast, and best of luck in the Six Nations and the rest of the year. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Cheers, mate.
Big thanks this week to Billy Vunipola for coming on to the podcast. I've been very, very lucky so far since I've started this podcast to get the chance to speak to some top athletes, but to talk to a rugby player who is currently one of the best players in the world, arguably the best in his position in the world. It was brilliant just to hear, you know, his experiences of how he approaches games, how he's dealt with setbacks in the past, even how he's dealt with successes as well, because, you know, as he mentioned, he's maybe struggled dealing with the success he was having at times, which is something that not a lot of people often think about. So just to hear him describe all those different things was brilliant, and to hear as well how sports psychology is implemented in the Saracens camp and also in the England camp as well. It was just interesting to hear. So thanks very much for that, Billy. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next week with a new update. Cheers.